Bridget Wood, naturopathic doctor at Awakenings Wellness Center in Maple Glen, Pennsylvania. We've been talking to a lot of our clients about the importance of iodine to their human health, and many of them have not heard of this before. Many of them are young enough not to remember that everybody did know about iodine just about 50 years ago. So I want to give you some information about iodine and something that they can reference at home as well. So iodine is absolutely essential to human health. I'm going to give you two books that you can reference to get more detail on your own. The first one is Iodine by Dr. David Brownstein. He's an MD, he's an endocrinologist, and he's got lots of testimonials and explanations about different clients he's worked with, so you might see yourself in there if you have a thyroid condition or other conditions that iodine helps. But also there's another book written for lay people, and Lynn Farrow is a good medical writer. So at medical conferences, she heard about the research on iodine done in the last 10 years, and she was there to capture it and do all of her due diligence. So she wrote a great book called The Iodine Crisis. I highly recommend it. Both are available on Amazon. Now let's talk about what do we know for sure about iodine. And these are facts that if you were to present them to your doctors, they would have to agree that iodine is absolutely critical for your glands. In fact, 65% of the thyroid is known to be made of iodine. Your doctors will know about T3 and T4 as the two primary hormones that the thyroid is making. The 3 and the 4 represent the number of iodine molecules on those hormones. So 3 iodine molecules or 4 iodine molecules. This is how our metabolism with the thyroid turns things on and off. This is the switching, up switching and down switching for your metabolism. So not only does the thyroid have all this iodine, but when it sends out messages to the other glands and indeed all your other cells, it uses this iodine molecule, which is switching on and switching off an iodine, to talk to everything else in the body. So it's absolutely critical. But where is it also concentrated in the body? That'll give you some hints about what it does. Its next concentration would be in the sex glands, so the ovaries and the prostate, but also critically involved in breast tissue. And it's also found in the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands and the thyroid gland have a reciprocal relationship in the stress response system, along with the glands in the brain, the hypothalamus and thalamus. So it's also found in some glands in the brain we never hear anything about, something called the substantia nigra. It's called that because they're black. There are 2 little black glands in the base of the skull, and these are concentrated full of iodine. You also have the choroid plexus, which is the part of the brain that is known to be controlling movement and the reward center, i.e., do you get happy or not? So these are pretty critical, and they have noticed, for example, that the substantia nigra is absolutely diminished, like dries up and almost is invisible in people with neurological conditions such as Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and dementia. So that'll give you a clue. Now, where else is it in the body? It's concentrated in the salivary glands, which is important. It's concentrated in the gastric mucosa. These two things work together to provide a barrier to bacteria, viruses, funguses, parasites, and things that are going to come through your digestive tract. So having the iodine there along the barrier of that internal tube in the body actually helps to prevent crossing of that barrier into the rest of the body. So if you're going to eat food that's full of bacteria like yogurt, you don't necessarily want those bacteria to get out of the digestive tract and go into your tissues. So that's why it would be in the gastric mucosa, which lines the entire length of your 30-foot tube inside. The salivary glands are where everything starts, and they are going to provide a lot of moisture when you're chewing, but they're also providing the very first stage of digestion. By mixing and having iodine in your salivary glands, you're actually taking the bacteria and starting the killing of it right there in the mouth. Also helps with dental health and gum health. Last place we find it, we know for sure that tons of iodine in the body, is in the ciliary bodies of the eye. They have to do with focusing of the eye. Now, I want to talk about also the substantia nigra and the choroid plexus is what is holding or producing a lot of our cerebral spinal fluid. So it's pumping that iodine out into the cerebral spinal fluid, which is actually flushing down, and mostly it's a semi-closed system, but it does also leak out into your lymphatics, which means you've got iodine in the lymphatic system, which is another good place to have it in between cells. So with all of this, you can see where all these glands have a function. Iodine's playing a critical role, but I'll say one more thing about iodine. Iodine is actually, this is chemistry, I know nobody wants to hear about chemistry, but you might remember that there are certain columns that have certain similar characteristics. Well, iodine is one of the halides, and the most important thing to know about the halides is they're all missing one electron in the outside shell. This makes them highly reactive with another column that has one available electron to donate. So what are these things? Well, you've probably heard about them because this is a lot. You'll find this in a lot of our chemistry in the environment and in our medicines as well. So fluoride, chloride or chlorine, fluorine, bromide, and iodine are the halides that you would know. There's one more. We don't really use that too much yet. But the salts that are in the column that relate to these halides are hydrogen. Very important. We know that in biochemistry, organic chemistry, of hydrogen and carbon as the two main things that are involved there. But sodium and potassium, we know about that for our nervous system. We have a sodium-potassium pump that actually allows us to have an electrical signal sent anywhere in the nervous system. So that's pretty key to the entire function of the body. Magnesium and calcium. These two things work together in all of our muscles. So we always heard about the calcium pump for muscles, but you may not know that magnesium is actually what turns it on and off. So these guys have important relationships with these other, and the halides are what effectively turn these things on and off and make them work. So our drugs, by the way, used to be all about the seaweed, all about the iodine. I'll talk about that in a minute. We're talking like 85% of all drugs and medicine going back in the history of time was all about iodine and how incredibly effective it was at just supplying that nutrient, and the body fixed itself. But now the drugs have to be patentable. So what do we use instead? Two other halides. 65% of all the pharmaceutical drugs today are actually made with fluoride compounds, and another 15% are now made with bromide compounds. And I'm sure they're working on the last halide, which is AT in the periodic chart. Don't know much about it yet, but I'm sure that they're not done looking at that as an avenue. But that will give you a start about the biochemistry of iodine, and now I'm going to talk about what it does in the body. So now let's focus in on what iodine does in the human body. The first and most important thing, since it is particularly important to the thyroid controls the metabolism of the body. We're talking about how cells eat. So you eat through your digestive tract, but once the cells are actually being fed, then we call that cellular metabolism. So that's cellular energy, turning on and off cells. It controls body temperature, all those sorts of things. So when we're talking about metabolism, that would probably be the most important role for iodine. That's every single cell in your body needs iodine then, right off the bat. The cytoplasm of the cell also requires iodine. It's actually the heaviest element that we require of all the elements from the periodic table, and it's also the rarest one that we require on Earth. So these two things are an interesting factor, but the bottom line is it's involved in the salt chemistry of the cell. It actually helps to keep redox reactions flowing. That's sort of an ongoing, sustainable reaction of the salts in the cell, because the cell liquid or cytoplasm is actually living salt water. And the key to that whole thing is iodine. Its gravity actually helps to hold the salts inside the cell and control the movement in and out. So iodine is really critical to a lot of cellular metabolism. All glands, we talked about it being important for their structure and function. So if you want glands to be healthy, you need to have sufficient amount of iodine in your body, and this is true of every gland in the body. Fertility and pregnancy, as well as really puberty, especially in women. Fertility is something with low iodine, you will have trouble having a viable egg. Women actually need iodine when their breasts grow in puberty, and that's actually a lot of iodine they require. So you will notice during puberty in women, if they have a deficiency, they'll show thyroid problems. Men, it's not so much, they don't have that larger requirement during their puberty. In pregnancy, you need iodine. We know that babies are born with low IQ if they have too little iodine, and they can be born even severely retarded, deaf, and other things you don't want to have for your child. So iodine is critical to the health of the baby and fetal development. It actually is especially important to brain development. And this is proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. There was actually a study done in China. There was a province in China, the Xinjiang province in China, was known as the Idiot Province all the way back to 1200 AD. And a scientist named DeLong went there in the 1980s, and he said, I wonder if the fact that of this province being known for having very low IQs and they were shorter than the rest of the people in China, if maybe that could have something to do with iodine, just a theorem he had. He tested the soil, he tested the waterways, their irrigation canals, and there was 0 iodine in it. And he really knew this from a study that happened in the US earlier, but he went there with this postulate. He found out there was no iodine. He put a barrel of iodine on a bridge and a guy with a gun on it, and he let it drip into the irrigation canals. And within 2 years, they saw IQs shoot up in the children by 15 points. They gained 4 inches in height to become equal with the national growth rates in all of China. And they no longer have a lot of stillbirths, miscarriages. Children are born healthy and they grow appropriately. So that's pretty strong. This is drop, drop, drop into an entire province irrigation system over 5 years. Completely changed the history in this province in China. So pretty significant. And also with the brain and the nervous system, we talked about how the salts, the sodium-potassium channel for how we conduct electricity along our nerves, is actually being manipulated by halides. Well, we're not supposed to have so much fluoride or bromide in our body. Chloride is definitely a halide that we use. Fluoride has some small uses, but it's pretty much toxic like bromide. Iodine is the critical halide that helps these reactions take place. So without it, your nervous system doesn't function very well. The immune system, basically iodine is your barrier to keep parasites and bacteria out of your central nervous system, which is a place bacteria and parasites are trying to get because your immune system is not functioning in the same way inside of that system. Iodine is really the barrier there. The mucosa lining along the entire interior tract of your digestive system is the other barrier to keep things that are not good for you out. And the bacteria that are friendly with you have learned to cope with this iodine barrier. They actually live within it. We don't know why, but we do know that they are not penetrating that barrier, but they can cope with the iodine levels very well. So there you go. That's the function of the body, and that's very important. So